Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of the Unofficial Game Pass podcast. Today, we are looking at Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which is a game released in 2019 by Respawn Entertainment, who most people will probably know for the now popularized series Titanfall, Apex Legend, and such and such. Then it's obviously published by everyone's favorite agency, or third-party agency in this case, Electronic Arts. I have to say, just before we get into it, Connor, I know this podcast has been keeping me, separating the days during lockdown. It has taught me two things. First of all, to take a break and play a game, and secondly, to always remember to shave on Thursdays, whether it be in the morning or the evening, just so I don't look absolutely terrible when I come on camera. But it's good to have you again, Connor. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, not much to introduce, am I? But here I am.
I wanna start off because we're talking about Jedi Fallen Order, and obviously it's a game within the Star Wars universe, and obviously with that sense, we kind of need to take into account the context of which this game is made. So it's obviously part of one of the biggest franchises probably to have ever graced, or in some cases, some people might say to have annoyed them throughout their period of life. What are you? Would you say you're a Star Wars fan, Connor?
Yes. I see. If you'd asked me that months ago, I probably would be like, yeah, I used to like Star Wars, but I think since because I played this game when the Series X came out. I got my Series X, and the first game I played on my Series X was Jedi Fallen Order because EA Play came to Ultimate Game Pass on the same day. So that was basically took the place of my launch title because we didn't really get one. And after that, I went and watched The Mandalorian with my girlfriend, and we went and watched, I think, the first 6 Star Wars films, and then I never showed her the sequel trilogy because it's like, yeah, you can stop there. And since then, I've went and I've bought the classic original Xbox Star Wars games, which always will be just absolute gold. Really just made my childhood, those original Xbox Star Wars games. So yeah, I will say I'm a Star Wars fan, although I had fallen out of it for a long time, and it's The Mandalorian and this game sort of reintroduced me, and so yeah, I will say yes.
Yeah, no, those old Star Wars games, particularly when the ones fully developed by LucasArts, are interesting in a sense because I think at the time, George Lucas, I think, had full creative control over those games, so he wasn't like afraid of like saying just do something wacky or do this. But on the same time, I know a lot of times when everyone brings up Jedi Fallen Order, there's always the discussion of the cancelled 1337 game for Star Wars, and people kind of say, well, George was an absolute hindrance on that because it was just meant to be a regular game at one point, and then I think 2 months away from when they were meant to announce it, was like, okay, make it a Boba Fett game. and since then, I don't know if the actual Disney acquisition has made it better for Star Wars games in the sense that it's given the companies more creative control. I know certainly now I'm probably a bit more hopeful on it because obviously more companies are allowed to use the IP of Star Wars as opposed to solely being owned by EA. But even under the EA sort of guise, they had their hits and misses. I think they really underutilized the time they had with it. I think they only released realistically, I think overall, they released 4 proper, fully fledged out titles. That, of course, being the 2 Battlefronts, this game, and Star Wars Squadrons, which is making its way to EA Play, I think, actually in the coming days, I think. So that should be something we'll be looking at in the future. But I kind of want to talk. Okay, so let's talk a bit about this game. And particularly, I want to kind of start with the story because I think, as you mentioned earlier, if stuff like The Mandalorian and this title has taught us anything, is that Star Wars stories now, especially in games, seem to really like to preoccupy that place between the 3rd and the 4th movie and between the 6th and the 7th, and they kind of tell the stuff in between there because that's, I think, where people are allowed to have their sort of fun creative wise because there's not a lot tying them down to certain events and features. So this story obviously follows Cal Kestis, who's played by oh god, I'm after forgetting the guy's name. Cameron something is his name, and I know him just because I've seen him in Shameless, and he's also in Gotham, I believe, the TV show that I, I don't know how long it's been since I watched that. It was on CBS, I believe. Um, but yeah, no, it follows him pretty much 5 years after the full, Jedi purge and the Jedi Temple and everything we see in Episode 3, and he's kind of laying low, sort of in this back end planet, just scavenging ships along with his friend, who, until I looked it up again, completely forgot his name because he makes such a brief appearance in the game. Prouf, I believe, is how it's pronounced. But no, it certainly gives off a very good premise, and I think the first thing you kind of notice from it is it has this big opening shot of all the Republic ships, and then some of the Separatist ships coming down as well. Like, it's really a visually stunning game, which I only realized after this. It runs on the Unreal Engine 4, which is by no means a bad engine, but I am always blown away by the sort of level of detail that seems to come out, and how much they can prioritize in these sorts of games. I don't know, what was your sort of experience with, what was your first sort of feeling when you saw it all? Did it kind of, make you nostalgic for the old Star Wars films? Did you think, oh, here's something new or whatnot, or what were you thinking?
I think when I booted it up, I thought, okay, this is a Star Wars game. I'm not sure what it's going to be like. Again, for me, it's like, it's not until that moment that you've got a lightsaber in your hand that it's like, oh yeah, this is Star Wars. This is what it feels like. This is, you've got like the lightsaber. It's glowing blue, and you get the shine off the walls, and you're attacking stormtroopers. That is the essential Star Wars thing that you want to experience, and obviously that feeling in a game is never going to be dull. It's always going to be exciting for me, wielding a lightsaber. I think it's a really nice analogy starting it off in like a junkyard where you see all these destroyed ships and everything from the prequels, because it's like, out of all this kind of old decaying rubble is a small bit of hope or something new, which is a Star Wars trope, but it's also a good analogy for this game, and for the modern Star Wars media, which has been like a breath of fresh life really for the franchise.
Yeah, definitely. I think like this, I think more recently, I think with regards to Star Wars, I think it kind of fell off for a little bit, and I don't say fell off in the sense that it wasn't a financial success, because obviously anyone would be completely lying to themselves if they said that the more recent sequel films weren't really financially viable. Obviously, I think for a long time, The Force Awakens was the most, I think it raked in the most amount of money on any weekend of the opening of a box office. I think it was overtaken then by another Disney property in Marvel. But the thing is, one of the aspects that has always been criticized by more recent Star Wars ventures is that there's been a lack of sort of cohesion when it comes to story, and then also a lack of creativity and willing to push the bounds in story wise. We've seen a lot of pushback to some of the more recent films, particularly on originality's sake, because I think once you come to The Force Awakens and you've seen your third iteration of the Death Star, you kind of think, okay, now is this kind of the definition of rinse and repeat? But particularly I enjoyed this for a sense because I like the fact that, first of all, you don't start as the typical Star Wars thing is, to jump straight into the action. Like, we've seen that in, like Episode 4, you start straight on the Tantive 4 and you're getting fired down. Same with stuff like the Revenge of the Sith, where you're in your Starfighters at the beginning. I like that it's a bit slower to introduce us to everything. I think particularly it kind of reminds me very much of, and I don't like the movie for a lot of reasons, but very much the opening of like the Phantom Menace, where this is sort of like when you're on the train at the beginning, there's that sort of menacing thing of, well, something's going to happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. And then once it does, everything sort of kicks off then, and you're kind of into the action. But even still with that, it still provides a good level of progression in that sense. So you've got like certain Force abilities don't become available to you until later down the line. But it also tells, I think, a story in a sense of dealing with, past trauma, which I thought was really, it's something that never really fully gets explored in Star Wars. Like, I think obviously Star Wars is mainly catered towards younger younger people, so they're not going to be telling these real in-depth stories unless it's with something that they know they're catering to those larger audiences. So say like The Mandalorian, or even some of the later stuff in the Clone Wars that they did. I think overall this game does a really good job at kind of, first of all, analyzing the events of Revenge of the Sith and Order 66 and kind of puts it all into perspective. And there's a really good, like, this is no spoiler, everyone who has seen the trailers or knows anything about this knows that there is a scene for Order 66 in this game. And it does a really good way of kind of showing how Cal has been dealing with that since it goes on. And as you progress through the game and get greater force abilities, you can see the confidence of Cal kind of, grow until the penultimate element of the game where, well, I'm not going to spoil it, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. But, in a sense, it almost comes crashing back to him and he's reminded of it again. So it's, in a sense, I think it shows like he's faced with two sort of scenarios, is that he regains sort of his ability with the Force through his scenario with Order 66. And then when he's confronted with a very similar moment of dread near the end of the game, it would have been easy for him to kind of go back to that. But then you kind of see him rise above that at the end of the game. And obviously we don't have a sequel to this. I don't know if there will be a sequel to this game. I don't really want there to be a sequel to this game. I feel like it would ruin the good story they've told here. And I don't think anyone particularly needs a sequel to this game. Actually, that's a good question. Do you... Obviously, first of all, let me ask, what were your first impressions of the story-wise of this game throughout its entirety? And then kind of, do you think there should be a second element to this game as well?
Well, I will say that I think there is... They have announced that they're doing a sequel, I believe. As for the story in this game, I think if you're a Star Wars fan, it's not something you're gonna have not been acquainted with already. I think it's quite it's a stock narrative for a Star Wars game. I feel it has what you expect. Nothing's completely new or original, but it's a good Star Wars story. It's told well, with good characters and mostly good acting, and I think it's okay. I think that a sequel could probably tell a better story, because at the end of this story, I feel like the characters are set up now. I feel like you've got a team of characters at the end of this. However, I will say I personally don't want a sequel with it's really hard for me. I would like to see the story carried on, but I would not like to see a game take the same mechanics and same kind of thing that Jedi Fallen Order has done. Because I prefer more linear story-driven experiences, and I think that a lot of the storytelling in this game happens between a lot of exploration and backtracking, and generally that kind of Dark Souls feel of navigating a map and killing enemies, which is not really the best way for me for a game to tell a story. I feel like Dark Souls itself knew that when they hid their story in very cryptic little clues and nods, but yeah.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up about, like, sort of in terms of mechanics wise, how some of it feels like the Souls games, and obviously elements like the meditation areas in which you save your game point are very much ripped directly from sort of the Souls fire. I think that's one of the main criticisms that I see with this game, is that whilst it's not a bad game, it lacks in originality, like especially gameplay wise. The combat is very much nothing new. There's the obvious dodge, evade, counter, whatnot, and I suppose there's not much you can really ask people to do, but it would have been interesting if they had done something more, considering they are taking on probably one of the most recognizable franchises in media. I think elements like wall running have obviously already been covered by Respawn, and stuff like Titanfall 2, rope swinging and climbing are very Uncharted elements as well. And I'm sure there's other stuff as well that, I'm kind of not thinking of at the moment, but have also been kind of done in other areas. And that's not to say that just because another game has done something that it should be, chastised or kind of thrown away and not looked at ever again. I think that's a think that's a bad way of looking at games. But I think to have all these elements and then not introduce something new is almost a disservice to, everything that you could have achieved with it. Because like you think about the Force, like the Force is probably one of the most enjoyable things in the Star Wars universe. Like the amount of combat or gameplay mechanics you probably could have ripped out of it, like bar the typical push, or like when you force push someone, it doesn't feel like you're actually force pushing someone. And I know games have gone overboard in this sense as well. Like believe me, I've played The Force Unleashed, which is like the other end of the spectrum on that regard. And those games are great in their own regard. I think they're probably tied for me with this game if I had to put them up against each other gameplay wise, but they certainly have their own problems. I'm trying to, I'm just trying to think of things they could have possibly added to have made that better. I don't know if there's anything you could think off the top of your head that would have, like, because it's easy for me to be like, oh yeah, they should have brought stuff in, but at the same time in my head I can't really think of major gameplay changes they could have made. But again, maybe I'm not a gameplay developer. I'm not a developer, so it's not really my job at the end of the day, really, is it?
It's genuinely like not what they added, but just kind of how the gameplay manifests and what they've done itself. So I think it's hard to really analyze this game without looking at the Star Wars games that have come before it. You mentioned Force Unleashed. Now, I loved the Force Unleashed when I was younger, because it was that game that you could always sort of just have fun by grabbing a stormtrooper and throwing them about with a force. Like I could just spend ages on just like the first level, just grabbing up stormtroopers with a force and being like, haha, I've got you, and throw them through a window. Like little me loved doing that. You felt overpowered most of the time in Force Unleashed. That's generally how I want to feel if that's how I'm supposed to feel. If I'm supposed to feel as this powerful Jedi Sith character. I feel like I mentioned I've been playing all the original Xbox Star Wars games. So I've been playing Republic Commando, both Knights of the Old Republics, Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, Star Wars Racer, all those sorts of classic Star Wars games. And you really have to respect and appreciate the amount of like passion and love that LucasArts really put into those games where LucasArts was involved. Because there's so much there. Like there's so much in terms of, it's not, they haven't compromised either quality or quantity. It's like, let's include all these different planets, let's include all these different characters, let's include all these different nods to the films. And it's like, and they're in like the base game. They're not like EA where they're releasing a very polished product, but it stinks of like commercial gain, I think that the best Jedi combat I have felt is probably in Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, just because, I mean, you don't want a game like The Force Unleashed where you can hit someone multiple times with a lightsaber and it doesn't immediately cut their arm off. It's like, that's not how lightsabers work. I don't want a game like this where it's very Dark Souls-y and it's based on kind of blocking and riposting, or, whatever. I feel like Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, what it does is it gives you all these force powers at your disposal. You choose what kind of Jedi you want to be, whether you want to be light side, dark side, what your lightsaber is. And then you go in, and if you go in to swing with your lightsaber, the Sith immediately blocks your attack. And you can run around them to try and get kind of more gain on them, like leave them without defense. You can jump over them. You can do all those sorts of things that you see in the films. And that's when it feels like most like it should, is that lightsaber fighting isn't just reduced to kind of dodge and roll attack here and there and sorts of things. It's about, using the space. It's almost like, we've talked about this in Halo where the combat feels like dancing. When you've got that kind of free-flowing, and I've been playing the Batman Arkham games as well, and what those games are really good at doing is the flow of combat when you get into it, the counters, the special moves you can pull off, you can execute that perfectly, and it flows and it's like dancing. But then if someone hits you once, it knocks you out and you lose your rhythm, and suddenly you're not very powerful anymore. What I feel Jedi Fallen Order does, it makes you feel like you're not powerful at all. It feels like you should be scared at all points in this combat. So fundamentally, I feel there's so many things that go into to building kind of what it feels like to be a Jedi, and that, you know, at least in the combat, you know, when you put, say, strictly Dark Souls combat with strictly Uncharted platforming, what it does, it doesn't really create a Star Wars experience. It creates those experiences with a Star Wars skin slapped on it. You know, while it's the best Star Wars Dark Souls skin out there, it's still not really Star Wars, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because when I was thinking about it, because obviously I think this game only came out like a year or two, or at least it was only announced a year or two after the whole controversy around Electronic Arts saying that they weren't really that big of a fan of single player titles and that they didn't think there was a big market there for them. And obviously Respawn being a company under EA, I think there's an element of like, well, there was a lot of backlash, first of all, to that EA comment, I think, from people who are fans of games, and particularly people obviously who are fans of single player games. And there's there's copious amounts of titles that, you know, disprove that theory. You know, we mentioned a few of them: Dark Souls, Uncharted, and whatnot. But it kind of seems, it seems to me like maybe an element of the unoriginality was to appeal to as many audiences as possible, and maybe that was because of some level of pressure from EA to make the game financially, you know, positive in a sense. Because obviously if they're going in with the mindset that single player games don't sell as well as multiplayer games, and obviously this is going to be true, you know, multiplayer games are going to continue with this. There's this weird like sort of live service feature now that keeps going on with multiplayer games, where they introduce new cosmetics, weapons, whatnot to various iterations of titles. But a single player game, you can't really do that, bar maybe a story DLC, or maybe even a couple of cosmetics, as we saw. You know, there was a pre-order bonus at one stage to get a certain crystal for a lightsaber, and now that's kind of been iterated into just a general premium bundle now. But I think maybe a large level of the unoriginality is down to almost, I don't want to make it seem like, you know, Respawn don't have a part to play in levels of unoriginality in this game, because I think, yeah, maybe they do, but at the same time, usually a reason for such a lack of unoriginality in titles is never down to the actual developer. It's always normally down to the publisher in those sense, because the publishers are the only people worrying about the money in these scenarios. You know, the devs obviously are worrying about financial gain as well, but at the end of the day, these are people who are dedicated to making a good title, who have passion for the project they're working on. Like, I don't think you're going to find a single person at Respawn that isn't dedicated to making a good Star Wars game. Hell, I don't think you find anyone in majority of games companies that would be dedicated to making a good Star Wars game. But I think probably EA, and as we've learned in the years, like, you know, the way in which they take franchises and kind of almost make them commercial first and then games second, I wouldn't be surprised if this was sort of a ploy to make it as unoriginal as possible, so it would cater to as many audiences as possible. I don't know, what would your thoughts be on something like that?
You know, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because I reckon where LucasArts, where they were when they were making Star Wars 1313, they were probably thinking, you know, we've done lightsaber combat and we've done it well. Let's do a kind of, I mean, we will never know what Star Wars 1313 would have turned out like, but obviously we saw the main character using guns, and then there was, you know, the stage later on where they decided that they wanted to tie it to Boba Fett. We don't know what that game would have been like, but it looked new for Star Wars anyway. And at that time, probably Dark Souls wasn't at the forefront of probably combat mechanics and systems. So I don't know. I think that the combat system in Dark Souls has become quite popular in that, you know, you see a lot of games now using it. I think no, I'm not going to try and remember all the different names of the games coming out. It's a hard question. I will say that the reason why, I forgot to say, the reason why I love Jedi Knight Jedi Academy so much is also because the lightsaber attack button is on the trigger. So you feel like you're actually swinging that lightsaber. It feels completely new and free of kind of all the restrictions of kind of the other games have of, you know, you press a button and then it turns into button mashing. You know, that's not how it should feel. yes, it's always going to be a risk when you're implementing a new system or a new way of doing things. And it's very easy to go, oh, well, that works, we'll just do that. But I feel like the more I think about it, it feels especially cheap and quite lazy. Don't get me wrong, I love this game. I think it's brilliant, but there's not a lot pulling me back to it once I've completed it. Whereas Force Unleashed, I will say, there are many times I played that game again and again and again, just because I loved that kind of gameplay flow so much. Of you go in and you feel powerful and you push enemies about and you like slaughter the room and you get more powerful and more powerful. At the end of the game, I've got all the abilities. I've got everything upgraded. I'll go into the meditation challenges, and I'm still like, don't know. I'm like a little wimp with all the schoolyard bullies. They've got like their shock sticks. Like one stormtrooper with a shock stick. That should be no problem. If some reason he's beating on me.
I will actually say though, I think this game, in a sense, is the only sort of real form of Star Wars medium that has made me understand how so many Jedi died at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Because if you ever see Star Wars depiction, whether it be the Separatists or stormtroopers, like, that they're about as useful as a can opener on a bottle. Like, so it's like the whole like point of it, I think whilst it probably may have been unintentional in a sense, it gives a certain level of threat and menace to the people you're facing, because as you say, like, the very early stages of the game, and I think this speaks true in a sense to kind of maybe what the sort of gameplay aspect they were going for. You get more powerful over time, because at the end of the game, I think you're pretty much just slicing through stormtroopers like it's nothing. But at the game, single group of maybe 3 stormtroopers can pose a level of a threat to any player. And even Ogdo Bogdo or whatever he is, that big frog that you encounter on the first planet you visit. Like, so there's an element of challenge, which is good. It would be better if that element of challenge was implemented in gameplay that was interesting, I think. Like, because I don't, like, near the end of the game, I wasn't finding myself, oh yes, I am in love with the stuff I've gained and all the skill points I've earned and, upgraded this, that, and the other. I was almost sort of dragging myself along to finish it just so I could get the end of that story. And the end of the story is good. Like, the narrative is spot on. I think it's a good Star Wars narrative. It's just that the gameplay that accompanies it makes it feel dragged out. I think this brings back, like, we've mentioned this conversation a few times when talking about games. What's more important, telling the story or actually making the game a game? And I say that, I don't mean that in a sense of I don't mean that in a bad way. I think there's games that really benefit from being just story driven with gameplay added on. Like, there's games that people love, like Uncharted. Uncharted is very much not this in-depth gameplay mechanic driven title. Like, it's very much a story first and a visual aspect second, and then possibly gameplay at the end. With iterations changing, I think Uncharted 3 probably goes the most gameplay driven I've seen out of all of them. But there's a point where, like, a game either has to commit to being a story driven first or a gameplay driven first, and it's very difficult for a lot of titles to get the both right. So there's very few games I can think of that have really addictive gameplay elements and a phenomenal story. Like, there's a reason, like, maybe I'm biased in a sense because I grew up with it, but Halo has that good sense of story and mystery. And even times I'd argue, like, the Halo story, the way it's presented in the actual games, is completely unorthodox and really difficult to understand if you don't go and look up what this is about afterwards. But there are elements of, like, it prides itself on being, I think, gameplay driven first, and story, whilst it's important, I think is all you can noticeably tell that it's a secondary feature. And games like, let's say, like, as I mentioned, Uncharted, or something like, even more recently in 2018, Detroit Become Human, which was on the PlayStation and has now gone to the PC, is very much obviously a story-driven game first. And there's just, well, I wouldn't even argue there's gameplay. There's movement and there's sort of pushes the buttons every now and then. But there's a good distinction there. And I think, for me, what kind of annoys me is that Jedi Fallen Order has a really good story and has a serviceable gameplay. And I get what you meant by saying kind of it felt lazy. I don't think personally that the game, like, because obviously the devs aren't lazy when it comes to this game, and I don't think that's what you meant either. But like, I see where you're coming from, and I think a lot of that is probably down to publisher demands and publisher, you know, due dates that have to be met, because obviously it's clear to see like the story is a passionate one that's being told by people who really want to tell a good Star Wars story. It's not like it's kind of this half-assed effort. And that's what kind of annoys me about it, is that there's so much promise in a title like that. And I think we will look back at this game probably in more of a positive light, because I think the things it's actually done for Star Wars single player games will outweigh the negatives that it came with just being a single title. Because I think for a lot of people, myself included, like, I kind of thought Star Wars single player games were going to start dying, and even at some stage as well, I kind of thought that Star Wars games in its entirety were on the downfall. You know, we saw the awkward release of Star Wars Battlefront 2. Granted, that game is a lot better now than what it was at launch. I think anyone in that community will agree on that. But for the mass populace, you know, it was still kind of this tainted game that pretty much, I think, actually brought gaming into the mainstream through its use of microtransactions, and in some cases, like in places like Hawaii, actually got microtransactions banned within video games and had them outlawed as an entire system. So Star Wars games were on like the fence for a long time. It's kind of difficult. It's kind of weird for people, because obviously Star Wars has always been a really prevalent media, but the games were like, they had died once, and there was definitely no guarantee that they wouldn't die a second time. I think now, though, I'm much more hopeful, and I think Jedi Fallen Order, whilst I think it's a mediocre title, has set up the stage for much better single player titles in Star Wars, and I think it's put a bar there. I think if anything's worse than Fallen Order, it's a bad game. But I think if anything's better, it's going to be a great game. That's not to say I don't think Fallen Order is a bad title. I think it's a good game. I do enjoy it. It gives me that sort of, like, I remember, because I played it when it first came out back in 2019, and it was close to Christmas, and, you know, everyone who's grown up with Star Wars knows that Christmas time is Star Wars time, because every year that sort of Star Wars movie will come out maybe in December or whatnot, or you'll have the show or whatever. And so the game coming out in December was a really good time for people to actually experience that story the way in which it was intended, and I think there was a lot of hype around it. So I think, and I fear I'm going on a tangent here, but what I'm trying to get at is, I think the game is a bit of a letdown in certain regards, and I would have wished that it just either chose to be a story-driven narrative or embraced the full gameplay aspects of a bit more, because it was clear that from starting it that it was never going to be that perfect in the middle game where it had really good combat and it had really good story. It was very much a story-driven game first, and they should have led with that. I think there could have been a bit more creativity, but then again, you know, it's so difficult to tell, because obviously I'm not a dev and I don't work in the games industry, so I imagine there's a load of crunch. And I think we've articles have come out recently talking about the level of crunch time there is for devs and developers and QA testers and whatnot when it comes to creating a game. So my heart goes out to them, because I do genuinely feel sympathetic for people who are, you know, as we like to say, living the dream, creating video games for a living. But it's not an easy go at it, because it's a very difficult industry to be consistent in, and to, you know, create something that is the quality that people expect now. I think it's easy to look back on the old Star Wars games and look at them in this sort of rose-tinted glasses, but gameplay expectations for people back then were a lot different to what they are now. You know, you can have a game that's, you know, as we mentioned, like, you know, we talked about the Falconeer on one episode, and, you know, it's very much a gameplay. It's a gameplay, like, it's a good game, like, but if the Falconeer was to come out and say, like, I don't know, mid 2000s, maybe early 2010s, people would have thought of it a lot higher than they do now, which is unfortunate, because gamers' opinions of titles now are very much like, well, this has to look absolutely flawless. Like people's opinions on games now is the graphics need to be ultra realistic. You have to be able to not tell cutscenes apart from gameplay itself. You know, there needs to be seamless animations and whatnot. So there's very little space for error with these titles. So I think we have to bear in mind that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has the tacked on pressure of being the first Star Wars single player game in years. I think since it might have well been since The Force Unleashed 2. So I think when taking that all into account, and it's important because we take into account, various developers and, sizes of studios when looking at these. I think taking into account this game does a lot of good stuff. I think it definitely goes above the mark, and I think it's a testament to people that worked on it. If I look at it as a Soul game and not a Star Wars game, I can probably, if I was to take out all the social aspects that surround this game, I could probably say, well, it's all right. It's not great. I wouldn't go back to it, but I did enjoy it the first time I played through. But if I look at it as a Star Wars game, with all the sort of, implications I've added on, the cultural context it has, I think it's a phenomenal service to that sort of genre and to that sort of media as well. And I'm aware I'm going on loads here, and I need to let you speak, Connor, because I'm actually probably hogging up the time here. But I hope it kind of gets across what I'm trying to say, though.
Yeah, no, don't worry at all. I mean, there's so much there to unpack, isn't there? The difference between a story-driven game and a gameplay-driven game. I actually think, you mentioned Halo, because the reason I love Halo is because of the story. And yet Halo 4, which I think has a great story, I don't actually enjoy the gameplay loop of Halo 4 very much. And I think it's because that you're probably constricted to certain weapons, and also the enemies aren't very interesting. It just turns into like kind of mindless shooting and things like the dance for me in Halo. Keep talking about this idea of like jumping around and getting into like a combat flow. That's not present for me in Halo 4. I don't know why. But yeah, certainly in this game, and when I was playing this game, I absolutely loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I can't undersell that. When I got my Series X and the first game I played on it was Jedi Fallen Order, I was beyond happy that I could play a single player Star Wars game. And I don't mean to call the developers lazy at all. What I mean is I don't know why you would take, say, the Dark Souls formula. You're saying, okay, I'll create a Star Wars game with the Dark Souls combat. Okay, but it's not just the Dark Souls combat, because what you've got is the meditation zones, which are straight out of the bonfires in Dark Souls, and then you've got the maps which you have to backtrack on, and you're constantly backtracking, and there's no fast travel. I don't think that there is no fast travel to your ship, is there?
I think pretty much at the end of a section of that area you can't fast travel back, yeah. But it's nothing too major or anything you'd be using on the regular.
I just feel like, that works for Dark Souls, because you get into the atmosphere, the clink of your armor as you're walking along, and every hallway is unsafe, and then as you backtrack you feel more powerful because you're used to all the enemies that are there. I don't know if that works for Star Wars for me, because then it feels like it's taking me out of the game world, because it's like, well, I've liberated Kashyyyk, and yet if I rest at these meditation zones, all the enemies come back. For me, I'm left feeling a bit confused, because like, I'm a Jedi. I understand that I should feel slightly underpowered at the beginning and scared of enemies, but at the end, I'm a pretty powerful Jedi. I can combat with some Sith. I should feel, there should be more of a power thrill when I'm fighting enemies, and it's just kind of not there, because I never really get that combat flow going, because that Dark Souls gameplay loop is basically just dodging, blocking, and countering, and it's never reaches that kind of Batman Arkham feeling when you're flowing from enemy to enemy, just absolutely destroying everyone. The other thing is that there, as well as control, there's like all these collectibles about the place, and I'm really annoyed because I've got 95% of collectibles in this game, and I really wanted that 100 gamer score for collecting all of them and completing all the maps. But unfortunately, like, it's so hard to navigate all the different areas and try and find all those. There's force echoes where you kind of sense an echo and you get a feeling or a memory from people who were there. It's like left a little echo in the force, and then there's just like a deluge of boxes everywhere. You're just opening boxes all the time, which give you like different what do you call them, ponchos, give you different like ponchos and robes sort of things. And none of the ponchos look very Jedi like. They're
No.
like they're always like a little kid wearing a raincoat poncho out in the rain. It's never like I feel like a powerful Jedi or Sith. Some of them are quite good. That you have the actual like kind of cloth material, but most of them really do look like raincoats. It's really bizarre customization choice. You get more skins for your droid. You have a cute little droid companion, and again we learn that Star Wars, the best characters are always the cute little baby Yodas and droids that we can kind of awe over, because that's fantastic little relationship between a Jedi and a droid. That's always going to be a staple of Star Wars, and people are always going to love it when it's done correctly. But you're left thinking, okay, you have literally lifted these gameplay things and put them in a Star Wars game, and we know it's a formula that sells fine, but when you're thinking of a game, you want to do a Star Wars game, you're thinking of a concept. It's like, what makes those mechanics right for Star Wars? What makes this gameplay loop a good fit for Star Wars? And I wouldn't be surprised if, say, like, I literally would not be surprised if someone said to me that EA went to Respawn and they said, hey, we want Dark Souls combat with Uncharted platforming as a Star Wars game. Can you do it?
Yeah, definitely. I think I just want to touch on as well when you mentioned about the customization and like how you go searching around for boxes for different ponchos. I think only unless you're running into them or you're actively trying to get the 100 gamer score, I think looking for the ponchos is such a waste of time because they very rarely are any different bar say the color. Like I think maybe the skins of BD1 are fine, and the same with the ship ones, but you rarely see the ship ones unless you're launching off or landing or whatnot. But I think I think there could have been so much more customization options because you get some element of customization with Cal's Inquisitor skin later on down the line. So there's options there. It's not just that Cal's model is special in the fact that it can only support a poncho on top. Like they can definitely change his appearance in a number of ways. So I was kind of a bit disappointed to see that they didn't try something else. Like I would have liked if they had added some Jedi robes or something like that. That would have been something interesting and Star Warsy. Because for me, the entire time, like I don't think the ponchos were like a fun thing for me to like see first and kind of laugh at, because I don't know what it is about ponchos that make me kind of chuckle. But like the idea that like there's no other customization options, like I kept Cal in his normal skin for the entire time because the ponchos didn't really add anything, and if they did, I thought they looked kind of tacky. Now the one thing I would say about this is rain physics in this game, sometimes when they hit the poncho, will create some weird visual glitch that it looks sort of almost gel like. Now I don't know if you came across that, but that's certainly something that I had a problem with in a couple of scenarios.
I didn't encounter that. At least I didn't notice it.
Because it's certainly not a problem that's unique to just Fallen Order. Like I know that like as like I played Red Dead Redemption 2 there over in January, and like I think in particular rain particle effects and the sort of gradual sort of saturation of any sort of material on a character in a game is always going to be difficult to get down, and Red Dead does that quite poorly as well. So it's not like it's just unique to this game. So I'm not kind of calling that out on that basis. But what I would say is, yeah, no, it's not a huge issue. Nothing like that ever going to be. It's not going to rip me out of the sort of the gravity, because at the end of the day, I'm playing as a guy going around killing guys in white armor with a laser sword. So if that doesn't rip me out of any realistic immersion, I don't think a bit of rain particles is.
Yeah, I will say that I'm the sort of player that when I play a game, I'm looking in every corner for those boxes, and that I want as many BD skins and as many ship skins and as many poncho skins as possible, so that I can always look the best. And probably the best customization is probably the lightsaber itself, where you can choose different color crystals, different hilts, different switches, and you can literally from top to bottom you can customize with different little sets of patterns or skins. and that's cool. Although you never really see your lightsaber outside of the lightsaber customization menu. I mean, it's not that noticeable, but it is cool. I will say that, like, again, like, there's 2 ponchos which I think look pretty cool, which I think that look like what a Jedi would wear, and the other like 20 or something, they're just like, they're all really
the hot
silly.
pig
I don't know
poncho
what
isn't
they're
something
thinking.
I'd imagine a Jedi in hiding would be going around wearing. Like,
It's not. I don't think it's even hot pink. It's like soft pink. It's not even cool pink. But yeah, it's strange. It makes you kind of wonder, why why were they making those choices, which isn't a good start.
yeah,
I think the other thing that you said, what you said about, some points in the story really shining. Again, you mentioned the Order 66 moments, the flashbacks to that moment of the prequels. I think they are really fantastic. There are genuine bits of this story that really stand out as being really good, and it's a shame that it almost feels like you're grinding through each area to get to those. I enjoyed the whole game from start to finish, but I'm not jumping in to play it again. I tried searching for the collectibles, I couldn't find them, and even the meditation challenges is like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not enough of a masochist to put myself through that. So
no, yeah, definitely. I think the only way that I would ever get everything maxed out ranked is if I did a new game plus. And as you mentioned, the game doesn't lend itself very well to being the most replayable. I think if we got nothing else to go on, I think we'll go on to our spoiler segment, if that's good for you.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just for anyone listening, if you haven't played the game yet and you still want to experience it, I think maybe we just give a quick, spoiler-free verdict on whether we think the game should be worth the play. If you want to kind of start us off there, Connor.
Yeah, I will say, I'm just trying to think about things we haven't touched on really. We haven't really touched on. I mean, everything looks and sounds brilliant. Sounds like Star Wars. I think that I've heard other people really praise the work that the composer did on the soundtrack of this. And going back and with my ears pricked up, yeah, it sounds good. But I have to say, playing it the first time, I didn't really notice the music at all, and maybe that's just my fault. But again, maybe that's how the music is implemented throughout the game. I don't know. Maybe it was so good that I just didn't even really notice that it was something different. It was just Star Wars music, brilliant. I will say that if you're a Star Wars fan and you've got Game Pass, this is a must play, because it's a single player Star Wars game. What are you waiting for? It's a good single player Star Wars game. As Star Wars fans, we do deserve more. But then if this game is the stepping stone to better games coming, if it shows that there's a market for it, go for it. But again, it's that problem, is that it's a good game, it's worth playing, but it is imperfect. So yeah, definitely worth a play.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of the same sentiments there. I think if you're a big Star Wars fan, you should definitely play it. I think if you're into sort of solo stories, I think you'll maybe get something out of this. Gameplay wise, I mean, I've heard people say that they really like the gameplay in this game as well. I think the majority consensus is, though, that it's kind of lackluster and mediocre at best. But I would say, though, like, it's one of those things, isn't it, really? Because if you're into stories, I'd say give it a go, and I think you'll know after maybe I think you'd probably need to spend at least an hour with this game. I'd argue even 2 hours, because it is a long campaign to go through. I would argue to spend at least 2 hours with it. Maybe get yourself acquainted with the base material in the game, basic combat and then basic force abilities that you kind of get up until that point, and then decide really whether is it for you. A lot of this will be very much down to whether you enjoy the universe of Star Wars, though, I think. Right, so with that being said, anyone who hasn't played it, please go off and play it. We will wait for you as you go away and play, I think, the 40 plus hours of gameplay this thing can provide you with. But for those who are sticking around and have played through the full game, want to get our spoiler reviews, I think we're going to briefly touch on a few bits that obviously we couldn't mention in our spoiler-free part of this. So I kind of want to start off, first of all, because I want to mention, obviously, and this seems to be becoming a trend with Star Wars things, at least more modern Star Wars media, is that one Darth Vader scene and everything that happens. But I kind of want to mention the ending because I think it's a really, really good ending. I don't know. I'm because obviously you kind of mentioned that there quite possibly is a sequel, so it's kind of more of an intermission really then in that stage, isn't it? So what do you think of it?
I felt personally that they were leaving it for a follow up. I felt that there was, obviously that explosive, really awesome sequence at the end with Darth Vader, which is fantastic. And the conflict and the character progression really culminates really nicely in that scene. But at the end, when they're just back on the ship, it feels like, well, where are we now? I mean, Cal decides to destroy the holocron, and yeah, again, when I say that it's going to be something that no Star Wars fan has not been acquainted with already, if you've seen the Clone Wars, like holocrons with force sensitive children is not a new concept. It is a plot device that has been used many, many times, something that needs to be protected against the Empire. And even a Jedi without his master that needs to hone his skills, that's not a plot, that's not a narrative that's new. And at the end of this, yeah, it's a nice send-off, but it is like, we've just got this new female character on board who's quite an interesting character. We haven't had much time with her. It feels like there's strands in there that are leading to something that need to be expanded on, rather than if this was a standalone story, there would be, at least for me, more stakes, like more danger for the characters, maybe like a death or something really, like the end of their mission for them to go, okay, and now we can start again. But at the end, it's like, no, we still have more work to do.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because I think obviously privatized at the beginning, so there's not really much of a connection with the player and that character. He kind of really exists almost to set up Cal using his force abilities again. That's the only reason he's there. So there wasn't really a great sense. I mean, I suppose maybe his master dying is kind of it's a key point within the story, and I think it'll only really resonate really with people who are aware of the Star Wars universe. Like, because if you don't know what Order 66 is, you're kind of wondering, what the hell is this? Like, what's going on? Which I think I don't blame Respawn for that being the case. I think if you're going to go into a Star Wars game knowing the history of the medium, you should probably at least have some basic knowledge of what happens prior to this game. And obviously, like, I think everyone knows who Darth Vader is. I think there was a study showing that he's like the most recognizable silhouette of any pop culture icon like to ever exist. So even alone, like, you can identify, like, how many people can you say, I can identify them by how they breathe? Like, there's very few people. I don't know, you'd have to be some weird messed up individual to know who someone is if they breathe, but in Darth Vader's case that seems to be sort of a normal thing. I like the way he's like, because most of the time people kind of like, I get it, it is fan service, but I think there's a really weird, like, negative connotation towards fan services if it's always a bad thing. Like, I think if it's earned, it's well worth it, and given the context of the game, I think it earns that bit of Darth Vader, because it's not like they haven't introduced us to any new characters or fleshed out any new people or whatnot, like, so it's not like they're clutching at straws at the end to make it somewhat memorable. But like, Darth Vader being introduced, I like, because in one sense it's like, obviously you've been fighting against the second sister for pretty much the entirety of that game, in like either directly or indirectly, and at least for me, I find the gameplay combat in this game quite difficult, and coming up against the second sister at the end is a really difficult fight in my eyes, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. I don't know, would you agree that it's a difficult encounter?
I probably I probably struggled more on the previous fights just because I think I know her attacks quite well because you fight her quite a few times throughout the game. So I found some of the other ones more difficult.
Yeah, but I think it's one of those things that like you either get the combat down early on or you're still kind of struggling till the end, and that's something that I kind of found because those sorts of like heavy counter block combat systems have never been my strong suit. I'm quite brash when it comes to playing games like that, so I always tend to just kind of jump in. But then to like see like I think that the great thing about Vader coming in at the end is that like the second sister up until then is probably the most menacing foe in the entire game, and it's a big struggle to defeat her, and you're like, oh thank god this is over. And then out of the shadows comes like probably someone who's 10 times more powerful than her, that the second sister doesn't even bother turning around to even look at. She's so scared of him, like, so you're kind of thinking, oh well shit, like this is like next level stuff. Like, so it's good in that sense because it makes you feel like despite the fact you've gotten to the end of this game and you've progressed as a player and gotten more and more powerful, you're still absolutely nothing in comparison to what he is. And there's a bit where like I thought it was so funny because the first time I was absolutely shitting bricks because I saw that you had to fight him and I was like, oh my god, there's no way I'm finishing this game on the difficulty I'm playing it on. And then obviously you learn pretty quickly that it's just kind of like a formality, and then you kind of have to evade him, which is the best way they could have done it. Like there's no way you should, like, I would have been quite annoyed if they had it like that, you defeat Darth Vader by some luck, he still survives and that how it makes it canon. But that would be so stupid if Cal just after only like a couple of missions was able to defeat Darth Vader. So I think they handled it quite well, both from a gameplay and a story standpoint, and it makes that ending so memorable. And it also, like, not only that, but it also adds a lot to the characters, like characters you're alongside. Oh god, this is the one bad thing about this game, is that I always forget the character's name, but the one who's yes, that's it. It develops her quite well in the end because obviously you learn that she's had like that, Trilla, who turns out to be the second sister, is her former apprentice, and there's a big history there, and how she and how Seer has kind of battled with the dark side in certain elements. And there's a good story there about battling your inner demons and kind of overcoming that sort of stuff, and that's something else completely. But Vader is kind of the encompassment when it comes to her of that, like, of that, of all her fears, of what everything that that Trilla could have become if it wasn't for some saving grace near the end. Like, so Vader acts as a good antagonist to every one of the characters, not just Cal, which I like from a story standpoint. And that's the good thing about Darth Vader, is because Darth Vader pretty much is, if you boil it down to him, some dude who got burnt on a planet and is just in a robot suit. And like but it's the stature of him, like it's the actual, like it's the silhouette of him, as I mentioned, it's the voice, it's the breathing, it's the sort of weight that character holds in pop culture that makes him so iconic for a game.
He also comes in on the high ground.
He does. He has learned from past mistakes, and this is what I mean about it being between episode 3 and 4. He knows his stuff, like, although he forgets the high ground in episode 6 then, because Luke gets above him and then we don't see it, but he has learned. He knows how to throw his lightsaber now. Sorry, getting off topic. But no, I do like it. Maybe I'm a bit of a sucker for whenever Darth Vader's in anything to do with Star Wars, because I really like the character itself. Even from just an aesthetic point of view, I think I just find him so intriguing. It's like it's comparable in a sense to, like, say, Boba Fett. Like, Boba Fett for a long period of time in the original Star Wars films was like just visually appealing to look at. It wasn't that he was of any main importance or held any like deep connection with the viewer. Like, I think he has like 2 lines in the entirety of Empire Strikes Back. But Vader always holds that. So like if somebody said draw me evil, the first thing that pops to head is someone like Darth Vader. And while that's a simplistic way to look at it, he works as that good antagonist for the end of the game. I think, like, obviously you touched on it a little bit, but do you think they should have included Vader? Do you think not, maybe? What do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's that thing, isn't it? Have you seen the end of The Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I spoil The Mandalorian on the podcast? Is that cool?
I'd say try and leave it if possible. It's not that old.
I shall leave it.
Or we could do a quick spoiler warning here, and we'll put a timestamp if they want to skip ahead.
No, No, it's all right. It's just that thing of like when you set something in a universe or in a franchise, say in the Marvel universe and the Star Wars universe, but you do not have the characters that people are aware of, then a player or an audience viewer is always going to be watching that or playing that, going, okay, when is this person going to show up? When is this person going to be linked to one of the characters we know? Just because those moments are so satisfying, just because it's like it's whatever, you know. I'm trying to think now. There's a moment in like the Hobbit where I think Gimli's dad has a little picture of little baby Gimli, and you know those little character moments, you know, they're fun. I think the beginning of the Force Unleashed, the first mission you play as Darth Vader, and you're wrecking up Kashyyyk and killing all the Wookiees. You know, moments like that are fun. Having Darth Vader at the end, they do it with respect to the lore. You know, if Cal raised his lightsaber against Darth Vader, he would die.
Yeah.
We know that from the lore. You know, it doesn't do what Rise of Skywalker does, where it's like just a punch in the face to everything we've learned about Star Wars. It's like, okay, no, this is Darth Vader. He kills Jedi for breakfast and eats them. It's like, no, run. And then when you're running, like he's so powerful with the Force that he's like gonna destroy everything in his path. You know, that's a completely lore friendly, and it's a tribute to Darth Vader, and it's fan service. You know, it's something to please the player. It's well done. It leaves you going, wow, you know, brilliant.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, to have it the most exciting part of the game, it does sort of cheapen the rest of the experiences. I think, you know, there are great moments set in the Clone Wars with Cal's flashbacks to his master. You know, you're saying hi to all the clones before Order 66, and they're all really friendly to you. You know, that sort of scenes that you never get to see in like normal Star Wars. That's brilliant stuff. But when you introduce Darth Vader, it's a shame if your story isn't powerful enough to stand up to the simple appearance of Vader, which I think, you know, is a shame. It's nice. It leaves in everyone's mind, you know, that is what they'll remember when they'll think of Jedi Fallen Order. It's like, oh, the Darth Vader ending.
Yeah,
it's fine, and in a way, it sells the next game because you're hoping on more of that.
The only thing is, like, it's always because is the Vader scene as memorable as it is because it's a good scene, or is it as memorable as it is because, you know, we're accustomed to who Darth Vader is and we know all this different stuff about Darth Vader? Because that's the case as well with the Order 66 scene, because Star Wars fans will know what Order 66 is, and they'll have some sort of emotional connection or emotional tie to that event. So there's some level of like sort of all the emotions that are brought up from previous, whether it's Revenge of the Sith, where there's that ending of the Clone Wars and whatnot. So there's elements to all of that are presented in the individual before they've even come to that scene. So there's some background knowledge, whereas when, you know, you come to an original scene, say like the fight against the Night Sister on Kashyyyk, which I think is a good fight. Actually, one of my favorite sections of the game is where you're abducted by the two bounty hunters and, you know, forced to fight in this sort of almost gladiatorial ring, like against all these different creatures. I think that's a really fun element, and it brings in, of course, your favorite factor of all games, throat singing. So I think there's elements like that, and I think those are memorable if you think, like, they're memorable Fallen Order moments. They're not memorable Star Wars moments. I think it, as I mentioned earlier, it's so difficult for a game when using Star Wars as its IP or its source material, when they bring up something that has already been mentioned in canon or in this universe, to not have that immediately be thought of as the most important element of that game. And I think just going on back to the point of like whether Darth Vader's appearance was necessary, I think in a lot of times Star Wars, for a a galaxy that's far, far away and is huge in its scale, you know, we always seem to bump into the same people in every sort of form of medium, whether it's the TV shows or the movies or whatnot. And everyone, if every single important, seems to be born on Tatooine for some reason. But like outside of that, like I think it's warranted in this case, because obviously if anyone has even like delved a little bit into, like, there's the new Vader comics, which are really good, and I'd recommend if anyone's interested in Darth Vader to give them a look. But there's all the stories about like how Vader is tasked with training the Inquisitors. So there's obviously going to be a link with Vader and the Inquisitors at some point, whether it's through like like it could have been as something as small as, you know, an audio transmission that we hear or something like that. So the appearance itself is warranted. Like there's other elements of where the game calls back to elements of, say, the Clone Wars or whatnot. Obviously you go to God, I can't remember the planet's name. It's the one where Darth Maul's species are from, where you meet the Night Sister. Irregardless of that, there's elements where, if anyone's watched the Clone Wars, they know that the Night Sister's extinction is very much down to the fact that the Separatist army and General Grievous were sent in to sort of massacre that entire village and that entire town. So there's a mention of this, at least you know, companions will mention that there was this big white metal Jedi, because obviously Grievous uses you know, Jedi weapons as opposed to Sith lightsabers, and that's why you have the initial drama when you go to that planet, because that planet doesn't fear the Sith, it fears the Jedi. Or there isn't, or as you'll see in most cases in those sort of Star Wars mediums, there's no real distinction that people seem to have. It's like I suppose it's like the Star Wars is kind of, you know, channeling its inner sort of centrist politics in that sense. You know, all politicians are bad. There's no good ones. So all force wielding saber slicing individuals are bad individuals in this case, and especially on that planet, given the history with it. So it's nice in that sense. And I think for anyone who's going into this game, they're obviously, like, I don't think there's anyone going into this game that doesn't have a prior knowledge of some form of Star Wars media. And anyone who is going into it is going in with the sole purpose of expanding on the media that's already there. And does this game do a good job at that? Yes. Does it keep it in canon? Yes. Does it go too much into the fanfic section and try and, you know, throw things around and, you know, have your character defeat Darth Vader or become like, you know, Grand Leader Supreme of the entire universe? No, it doesn't. So it's a grounded story. I think if one thing is for sure, this entire episode, we've sung the praises of the story because it really is deserving of that, especially in the Star Wars universe, and especially in the most recent Star Wars universe as well. It stands out as one of the best, especially at the time in 2019. This was one of the best Star Wars stories told to date, especially under the sort of Disney ownership. So I would say, yeah, the story is always going to be good in this sense, and it's the only real thing you can really spoil. I'm not sure if is there any other particular points of the story you want to touch on?
I don't think so. I think that like we've mentioned the bits of the story that really shine. No, I think we've covered it pretty well. I'm thinking of whether I had something else to say about Vader. Oh yeah. When we were talking about because there are games set within, say, if there's a game that I'm thinking of, but I really don't want to say that spoiler. But say if you play as like, you play a Batman game, right? You expect Joker to turn up at some point. Or you play a Suicide Squad game, and if Batman shows up, I'm really obsessed with Batman at the moment. I'm really sorry. But then, you know, when that character shows up, there's always that thing of like, are you happy just to see the character, or is it like a good scene that actually makes sense to the story? And I feel like, you know, the Vader scene is fine here just because it works. Like the build up to it works. You're going into like the Imperial base and everything. Yeah. It's fine. And yeah, you are just happy to see Vader. Yeah.
I think one thing in particular
they've done a very safe. Yeah, I was just gonna say they've done just a very safe kind of fan friendly game.
Hmm.
I don't feel like they've really gone out on a limb at any point. What they're doing is just to create a game that is likable, and it's likable, but it's not really. It doesn't ever reach that feeling of it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think the one thing I've heard people say about this game is that it feels very much like the Rogue One of Star Wars games. But I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because I think the only factor that these people are taking into account is that Vader happens to show up at the end of the game. Which, I mean, if that's the criteria to be the Rogue One of anything, like, slap Darth Vader at the end of this video and we have the Rogue One of podcasts. So, like, just I want to say, I think the one thing I think that differentiates, like, people say that Rogue One is a really good Star Wars movie, and I do agree on this. I think it's a good Star Wars movie, and it expands upon probably information we probably didn't need clarified straight away, or didn't need its own movie, but it's still a fun movie, and it's got great visuals, great score, whatnot, and some decent characters. I think the one difference I'd say between this and Jedi Fallen Order is that at the end of Rogue One, the only thing you really take away from that is, oh my god, that Vader scene was amazing, it's so good and whatnot. But you don't come away knowing anything really about Jyn Erso or any of the other people that are in that movie. Sure, there's little bits of character development, obviously, with her father and whatnot in that movie. But besides that, she's kind of just a pretty plain, dull character that, you know, pretty much her service exists is to get those Death Star plans and then progress a further story. And maybe in a sense that is what that movie is trying to go for. You know, I always like to kind of, I think as somebody who always loves the idea of wartime storytelling and the way in which stories like that always make the human diaspora and human life seem so malleable and interchangeable that it's not really important who the person is, more so what they're doing. I think that Rogue One does a very good job at sort of showing the casualties of a war that we don't see in any other Star Wars movie, bar maybe say the scenes in Revenge of the Sith, but even still at that point, like, that's very much family friendly PG stuff that, you know, we don't know any of those characters by name. I would say though, at least at the end of Fallen Order, you come away knowing bits about those characters. You know the struggles they've gone through, you know their past and whatnot, and obviously, you know, there's more time to delve into their stories because it's a game and not an hour to an hour and a half movie. But to call it sort of the Rogue One of games is a bit of a disservice in that sense, again, when the criteria for that is so low. I think the differentiation between the Vader scenes in this game and this movie is that, yeah, so let's put them on a criteria. Both of them, yes, are earned, and they're both, you know, they are, you know, logical elements of that movie, because obviously Rogue One directly goes off into episode 4 or A New Hope, and it's logical in the sense that Vader would show up because he's pretty much the head of the Inquisitors, and, you know, once you've defeated the head honcho, you're probably gonna, you know, be like a Karen and call for the manager, and so Vader's gonna show up. So they both make sense in that area. Vader's very much appearance in Rogue One is it's very much just a visual aspect, really. There's elements in which there's elements before where he meets Krennic and there's some sort of dialogue there, and he becomes, you know, the dad pun master of all time, where he says not to choke on your aspirations and whatnot. You know, I personally love that. Some people aren't a big fan of it, but I really like that. You know, obviously there's still a bit of that dry humor. But at the end, obviously his main purpose is very much just to slice up some rebels. Like, there's no because we know he's not going to get the plans. We've seen Star Wars. I mean, maybe if you're watching it in chronological order for the first time, you might have some sense of dread, but bar that, you know, there's no real narrative, there's no real deeper meaning for him being there. There's no real sort of like metaphorical comparison you could make for Vader being in front of those rebels or whatnot. So it's very much a visual aspect to kind of tie those two movies together. The end of Rogue One, as I mentioned already, I think there's a reason Vader is there, and it's because Vader is there to show that despite all the progress you've made, it's still very much you're still not anywhere near the level that you should be at to, you know, be able to, as we learn at the end, you know, start a Jedi Academy or get Force sensitive children and train them. Because I think ultimately at the end of that game, the whole reason, if Vader hadn't shown up, it would have made a lot more sense for them to have kept the holocron. But I think the fact that Vader shows up and shows how ill-prepared anyone would be for that scenario kind of tells them that we shouldn't subject someone to having to deal with someone like him. And there's obvious elements as well of like the like Trill and whatnot, and they've obviously seen what can happen if a Padawan gets taken and turned into an Inquisitor, and how immensely painful and traumatic that is for an individual. So it Vader's presence, I think, adds to the story and ultimately is a factor that affects the conclusion of the narrative. I think it would have been different if he wasn't there. So that's kind of why maybe I'm pulling at straws. I don't know. What do you think? I could be just kind of really reaching here and really going into the depths of my mind to try and make this make sense.
Well, I will say that I really loved Rogue One. I think to call anything the Rogue One of Star Wars games is a disservice to Rogue One, I feel. And part of the reason I love Rogue One so much is that it's an homage and tribute to A New Hope, which is probably my favourite Star Wars film, although I tend to find the prequels more watchable as of late. So in being a tribute to my favourite Star Wars film, having it merge into A New Hope at the very end, that made me giddy with joy seeing that, seeing Princess Leia and Darth Vader again. Just because you get, just even if it's just a few seconds, you get that it's like it's adding a little bit on to A New Hope, which is fantastic. It is a bit fan servicey, but again, Rogue One is always going to be the Halo Reach of Star Wars films. Halo Reach the movie.
We're great at comparisons, really, here. Everything comes back to Halo.
I feel that when everything comes back to Halo. When you're looking at Jedi Fallen Order, it's really clear that this is like the first time that you're playing like a Jedi game since The Force Unleashed. And The Force Unleashed is obviously quite you get quite a peek behind the curtain at Darth Vader, because Darth Vader to Starkiller is a father figure, and the ongoing relationship between Starkiller and Darth Vader is what really, really makes those games. It's fantastic. When Darth Vader appears in this game, considering that's the last context we got for Darth Vader, I think it feels quite new to have Darth Vader feel evil again, dehumanized, basically just this evil, like a charging bull that you've got to run away from. That's quite nice because it resets, because we spend all this time humanizing Darth Vader in the lore, and then it's like a reset where you are a training Jedi coming up against Darth Vader. It puts him in a new context. And then we see Darth Vader taunting and doing that thing that the Emperor does, where I sense your hatred, whatever. But we know, like we see him, and he is a scary presence in this game, which is nice to feel about Darth Vader, because sometimes you love a villain so much that you almost begin to root for them, and you see that with like the Joker. You see it with all your favorite villains, is that once you get familiar enough with them, it's almost like you like Darth Vader more than Cal Kestis, and to introduce Darth Vader in a way where you fear for Cal's safety, that's a really great way to do it. It's an interesting way to do it, and let's face it, when you're bringing out a new installment to any franchise, you are always building on what came before. So to build off of where we left off in The Force Unleashed, this new incarnation of Vader, I thought was really important for the game and going forward.
Mm-hmm. I think we've probably exercised the majority of our time now. And for anyone who is still listening, they've probably either fallen asleep, as we learned last week, to my voice, or have just... But in any case, I think, first of all, I think we'll finish off by, first of all, saying that overall, I think both of us can agree, and you can jump in if you feel I'm kind of misquoting or whatnot, but I think both of us agree that the story element of this game is good, with some sort of decent but mediocre sort of gameplay wise, and is probably, as we mentioned earlier, worth the play for any Star Wars fan, and maybe give it a shot if you're into that sort of element of what we've mentioned earlier. With that being said, next week we will hopefully be looking at Yakuza. I mean, I know we said that, I think the guts of 3 weeks ago at this stage, but fingers crossed I get it finished. It's not Connor's fault by any means, it's me.
It's taking me a while too, don't worry. It's a long game.
Yeah, no, it'll be it'll be, I think at this stage I'm gonna be happy to discuss it, but at the same time more relieved as well to have it finally finished. But saying that, we also have a Discord server that we started up just I think over a week ago now. It was linked in our last episode. It'll also be linked in the description of this episode. You can also follow us on all our social media platforms, be that Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, all linked below, and both our personal Twitters as well. I believe that's it. Yes, we have mentioned everything. But until next week, make sure that, I suppose, I wouldn't urge people to go and play 60 hours of Yakuza. I mean, if you have the time, you could do it and come back and see what you think and hear our thoughts on it. But until next week, we will see you all next time.